floating in the oceans of sense of pleasure. Our life will look like you're floating in the ocean, Pacific Ocean, and there is a peace, face of ocean. But the storm, the wind, is coming. Peace are floating. We are swimming in this floating surface of the ocean, which is the sense of pleasure. So to overcome such a kind of floating ocean, only one way, which is foundations of mindfulness. So I would like to interpret in my opinion, non-floating means stability of the mind. Mindfulness is very powerful to stabilize mental floating on a single object. This is the ekayana, the only way. In the Satiprana, Mahasatiprana discourses, Buddha expounded in 4 ways how to establish the mindfulness. This morning, Brahma Pandita quoted in 2 ways, in 2 techniques. This I've done, I would like to tell you only one. Sabba Kaya Padisavedi Asa Sesamiti Sekti Pasa Sesamiti Sekti. Sabba Kaya Padisavedi comprehended whole body of the breath. Whole body of the breath. Whole body means only the breath body, from beginning through the middle to the end. Sometimes some meditator, he or she or contemplate only the very beginning of the breath. He or she makes middle of the breath, end of the breath. Some meditator can catch and can follow only the middle. He makes beginning and end. But the Buddha expounded, Sabbakaya Padisavedi. Sabbakaya, whole body of the breath. Not meaning from feet to head. Only the breath body. We must follow. This is the end of the beginning of the breath. This is the middle of the breath. This is the end of the breath. Whole body of the breath must be clear, must come to the evidence in our mindfulness. Sabbakaya Padisavedi. To practice this technique, commentary and Visuddhimagga, the path of purification, made the commentary clearly in different ways, in 5 ways. But in this drowsiness afternoon, I would like to tell you only one thing. Pokto kasi chaitan tapitwa. Pokto kasi chaitan tapitwa. This is Pali word. Pokto kasi means in this very place, touching with the breath in nostril. Pokto kasi. Breath in nostrils are always touching. In this touching place, Pokto we must firmly fix the mind on this attaching nature. If we can fix firmly our mind on this attaching nature, we can catch whole body of the breath. This is the beginning of the breath. This is the end of the breath. This is the middle of the breath. Whole body of the breath from beginning through the middle to the end. According to the Visuddhimagga. So, brothers and sisters, Potokasa. Do not miss, this is technique to catch our mind monkey on this very touching place. We should try to catch with the mindfulness on this touching place. If we can fix our mind on this touching nature, on this very touching place with the nostril and the breath, we can use Sampajana here. Sampajana, Satima Sampajana. Sampajana means the sun and the pa and jana. Three words that come in combined according to the Pali grammatically. Sun means systematically. Pa means in detail. Jana means understand. Sati, controlling the mind, guardian of the mind. On the touching place, firmly fixed. We use a samjana. Samjana means in panya. Trying to understand in detail within ourselves in touching place. Sometimes breathing out, sometimes breathing in. Normally, we know only the breathing in or breathing out. Not only the breathing, but also sometimes in this breathing, hot and cool also comes and goes up. Sometimes cool nature also comes and goes up. Sometimes cross the nature and soft nature also comes and goes up. Sometimes liquidity and fluidity also comes and goes up. At least a full nature. These are called primary elements. Rather than in soft nature, it is called the Dhatu, element of earth. Sometimes hot, sometimes cold within the breathing. It is called the element of the heat, element of fire. Sometimes ocean comes in, goes in, ocean. This is the nature, air of element. Sometimes liquidity, fluidity, fluid. Together with the breath, this is the water element. These are called primary elements. If we can fix our mind on this breath, on this touching place, breath and nostril, we can analyze in these whole nature. These are called primary elements. They are great. They are enormous. They are huge power. Because all of our physical mental body, all of the globe, the sun, the nature, the star, the moon, etc. Everything depends on these four great primary elements. When they are balanced, when these great primary elements are balanced on this attachment, we will have comfortability. This is the junction leading to within a person. When they get out of balance, it will be coming disease, decay, dissolution in death. This is the junction. We can go to the within a new person. So, brothers and sisters, in the Majjhima Nikaya, Buddha expounded one sutra, Anapanasati Sutra. In this discourse, as Buddha expounded, Anapanasti Bhikwe Bhavita Bahuligata Chaktaro Sadipatani Paripureti. But in the very beginning, we are practicing only the Anapanasti. Later on, all of the four foundations of mindfulness are comes in together, not separately. While we are contemplating on the breath, we can contemplate four great primary elements also same time. When they get balance, we will have the comfortable sukha virat. When they get out of balance, at that time, we will feel the dukkha, the suffering. So, Anapanasri Bhikvi Bhavita Bhumigata Chaktaro Sadipatani Purupuri. In the very beginning, we are practicing only the Anapanasri, but later on, all four Sadipranas are dancing together. So this is called the Sampacha, San systematically, in detail, Jhana, trying to understand Sampacha. So, first of all, we should try to establish mental stability without floating in the sense of ocean. Later on, when we can establish our mind to be stabilized, we can contemplate in every nature of mental, physical nature. So sati and sampajana go together. In the very beginning, we started with the sati, later on, sampajana come together, going together. I want to tell you one example. In this bottle, everyone easily to know water. It is in a realistic nature. For foundations of mindfulness, it is very powerful to analyze and to understand realistic nature within ourselves and true nature within ourselves. And the first of all, we must understand realistic nature. Later on, we shall try to understand true nature. Without understanding the true nature, we cannot solve any problems of the life. Understanding the true nature is very powerful to solve the problems of the life. It is not water. It is not realistic nature. All of many brothers and sisters clearly understand. As a realistic nature, it is not the water. According to the realistic nature, when we analyze this water into two divisions, hydrogen and oxygen. When we can analyze this water into two divisions, water disappears. Water disappears. Realistic nature only hydrogen and oxygen. In the same way, first of all, we must try to evidence, try to clear understand our breathing for the establishment of the mental stability without floating in the ocean of the senses. Later on, we must try to understand in detail what I am, where I am, what I am meditating. Actually, there's no meditator, no meditation master. We can contemplate it on the very beginning on the breath. Later on, we continue to contemplate on the four great primary elements. But we must analyze in the side of a meditator, who is the meditator? Well, originally answer. Not he. There is no meditation practitioner. Only sati, guardian of the mind, Samadhi, stability of the mind. Effort, mental energetic will of the mind. Panya, understanding of the mind. Clearly understanding, clearly comprehension of the mind. Clearly comprehension of the mind and body. Viriya, effort. Sati, mindfulness. Samadhi, concentration. Panya, wisdom. And consciousness. Working together according to their task. Therefore, in the Visuddhimagga, commentator Buddhaghosa said, Sankhara Sankhares Vipassanti. Only conditional thing and compounded thing is meditating on the conditional and compounded thing. There's no I, no self. This is leading to the purification of view. So, my dear brothers and sisters, in the very beginning, we tried to establish mental stability with the mindfulness, contemplating on breath. Later on, we shall try to analyze this breath. What are the comings and going up? What are the comes and goes up? So we must fix our mind on this tip of nostril, Nasika, Gijik, and spiritual. Buddha expounded in discourses. And Visuddhimagga, Poktoka, Se, Chik, and spiritual. Therefore, we must fix our mind on the tip of nostril, analyze it, breathing in, breathing out. How many material qualities are breathing in? How many material qualities are breathing out? 4 primary elements. Hot and cold, grossness and softness, liquidity and fluidity, touching, nature. These are called primary elements. When we can analyze these great primary elements, we can step up our technique to contemplate on this very place, touching with the breath and nostril. At that time, we will understand automatically who is a practicing the meditation, Vijnana, Sati, Samadhi, Panya, and Viriya. Who Sankhara are practicing meditation on the 4 great primary elements. In the meditation side also, non-self, no soul, no person. In the meditation subject side also, all are Sankhara. Sankhara, Sankhare, Vipassanti. All conditional things and compounded things. Contemplating on conditional things and compounded things. Therefore, Buddha, every day, wherever he stays on this earth, according to the MR research, within 45 years, Buddha lived 14 places in India. Rajgiri, Saramasti, Nigdora, Ramakvila, etc. 14 places. In these 14 places, wherever Buddha lived, in the very early morning, when we wake up, all of a Sangha come and gather together at the foot of the Buddha, paying respect in the very early morning. As a pilgrimage. At that time, Buddha expounded Apamadena Sampadita. In the very evening lay, after the Dhamma talk, after the meditation practice, all of the Bhikkhu Sangha gather together and come pay respect, their homage to the Buddha at the foot of the Buddha, very evening late. At that time, Buddha said, Apamadena Sampadeta. This Apamadena Sampadeta is the Buddha's manual teaching. Every day, 2 times, early morning and late evening. On the eve of Buddha's death, southwest corner of Kushinara, between the Sana tree, at the very early evening, Buddha received royal family. Later, Buddha received the deity. At the midnight, Buddha received the Bhikkhu Sangha, answering their question. Last watch of the night, Buddha said, Vaya Dhamma Sankhara Apamadena Sampadeta. Vaya Dhamma Sankhara Apamadena Sampadeta. Now you hear Apamada, mindfulness. Buddha's manual teaching. Even eve of the death, this is the last one of the Buddha. Oh, brethren, all of a compounded and conditional things has their nature constantly flux. So, trying hard with the mindfulness to complete your task. What is our task? To complete the sila, to complete samadhi, to complete the panya. These are 3 things are our task we have to do in this Buddha's dispensation. So Buddha said in the many sutras, Apamado Amatamram Osu, Pamado Misunobaran Osu. Mindfulness is the way to deathless. If we can establish complete mindfulness within our heart, we're going to deathless, which is Nibbana. Heedlessness is a way to death. Lacking of mindfulness, way to death. Death of a life is not really important, but our dignity of Shila, dignity of Samadhi, dignity of Panya. These are 3 qualities of our life. So not to die of this dignity, we must be mindful in every activities of our life. Therefore, Buddha said, Apamado Amadamada. Mindfulness is the way to deathless. Heedlessness is the way to death. Apamadena Sampadeta, Vayadhamma Sankhara. All of a compounded and conditional thing has their nature constantly flux, momentary disease, decay, and death. Therefore, try to understand this nature of conditional compounded thing with the mindfulness and samachana, sati and samachana. This is our task to do in this very life. So in my conclusion, I would like to tell you, in my manual practice way, sit in the cross-legged position, in the quiet place, erect our body, close our eye, normally and naturally, breathe also normally and naturally. Nasika gi chaitan pitwa. This is a Pali text. Poktonga se chaitan pitwa. This is the commentary. Therefore, breathe normally and naturally. We must have fixed our mind with the guardian of the mind, which is a sati. On this fixed nature, we must analyze this breath into 4 divisions: hotness nature or coolness nature, roughness nature or softness nature, liquidity and fluidity, heat or cold, etc. These are called primary elements. They have break. They are called break because our physical mental body constitute on this great primary element. All of us, star, moon, global, ocean, tree, etc. constitute on this primary element. When they are balanced, we will feel happy. When they get out of balance, we will feel unhappy. In this junction, we can continue to the Viranadu. When we can avoid that these 2 extremes, happy and unhappy, our mind becomes stability and peace. And then we can contemplate our mental nature, happiness nature or peaceful nature or understanding, etc. This is Chitta Nupassana. All of us Satipadanas are comes in together, not a different nature. So, all of our my dear brothers and sisters, what is the last one? It's very wonderful. Vayadhamma Sankhara. All compounded then and conditional then has their nature constantly flux. We should follow to clearly understand. This is this nature of mental physical formation, compounded in conditioned with the mindfulness. Apamadina, Samadhita. Thank you very much.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. That's it. That is the most enlightened Dhamma talking by the most venerable Professor Dr. Ashin Yanisara. So thank you very much once again. So listening to his Dhamma talk is not only get rid of the drowsiness, but if we listen carefully with our mind, with the mindful listening, we can also get rid of the sorrow and lamentation, and also the passing away of the pain and grief. So thank you very much. And the next program, we invite our moderator to be here on the stage instead of me, and she will conduct all of the rest of the session. She is currently a lecturer of International Buddhist Studies College of MCU, and she holds 3 master's degrees in MBA Management International Program. The second MA is Language and Communication International Program as well, and the third master's degree is Buddhist Psychology, and also she received her PhD in Buddhist Psychology. With her deep passion in mindfulness and meditation, she went to study in the Faculty of Buddhism and also received a certificate in Vipassana Bhavana or insight meditation, where she spent her time in Myanmar. So without further delay, may I invite Dr. Pintong Man Sumitchai Chaknarat on the stage, please.
Thank you very much, Assistant Professor Dr. Sanu, and welcome back to the program, to the Triple Gem, to Mahasangha, VIPs, delegates, and audience. You all have my full respect here. And then our first speaker in the afternoon session, not delaying the program, Prapamana Vitet, or we known as Rongpa Kematamo. He is currently the abbot of the Forest Hermitage since 1985. And then, after that, around the year 2000, he supported a group of students at Warwick University with the formation of a Buddhist society. And every week since then, in terms of the time, he has taught the Warwick Buddhist University and Society. In 2003, in the Queen's birthday honors, he was made an officer of the Excellent Order of the British Empire. And the following year in Thailand, on the occasion of the King's birthday, he was made Jalk Kun, or the name Prat Bhavana Vichit. In 2006, he organized a meeting of the Theravada monks and nuns of various backgrounds, Thai, Burmese, Sri Lanka, etc. And we are very honored and grateful to have him here with us. And so please welcome Jalk Kun Prat Bhavana Vichit, our first speaker.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Mahatheras, Sangha members, all friends in the Dhamma. I'm very pleased to be with you. And I'm now on the program to talk about Buddhism in the prisons. I'd better say a little bit about my background, a little bit earlier than what you've just heard. 50 years ago, I was an actor in the Royal National Theatre in England. And at that time, when I first appeared there, I knew nothing at all about Buddhism. But I encountered Buddhist meditation, and my early experience of Buddhist meditation was with the Mahasi technique. And that meant a great deal to me. When I came to Thailand, I practiced for a short while at Wat Mahathat with Chokun Chotter. And then I went from there to Ubon to stay with Angkor Chan at Wat Nong Papong. That was 1972, January 1972. In 1977, Luang Por Chah was invited to England, and I went with him. And this was supposed to be a very short visit, just 2 months. But we weren't there very long. Sorry. When he decided that the only thing in his practice he really hadn't paid the attention to was the spreading of the Buddhism outside of Thailand. And he asked us to stay on. So instead of 2 months, I was 9.5 years before I got back to Thailand. The place where we were staying was where I discovered Buddhism, the Hamster Buddhist Vihara. And it was an area, sorry about this, which was very familiar to me. It was where I sort of grew up. And it was also the address that the prison service had for Buddhist matters. So we hadn't been there very long, and we had letters from 2 of the major prisons in England and a phone call from another, all with requests for someone to go and visit their Buddhist prisoners. And so, well, it was really down to me. I was on a train one day, alone with Luang Por Chah, and I asked him what he thought about me going to the prisons. And he answered very characteristically, "Fine, go." So that's what I've been doing now for 42 years. This is a rare week for me, because I haven't been in a prison this week. A few years back, I was in Ubon and I had to go and speak at the teachers' college there. 3 months from Wat Papong. I was number 3 on the bill. And by the time they got to me, these students were obviously pretty bored and pretty fed up with listening to long discourses. And the girls were examining their nails, and then it was me. So I said to them, let's not talk about Abhidhamma or anything like that. Let's just have a conversation about what I do in England. I'm the monk that goes to prison 3 or 4 times a week, and they all woke up. So that's what I'm here to talk about a bit, is what I do in the prisons and what I've been doing for these 42 years. Of course, when I began, the chaplaincy in the prisons was firmly in the hands of the Church of England, and they had no intention of letting that go. I was allowed in, I was allowed to go and see those who were registered as Buddhists, and for the most part it was simply having a conversation. Of course, before I went, when I first started this, when I first got these requests, I had to think about what I could do. I mean, I'd never been to prison, and I'd never been in a prison, except when I was an actor, and I was preparing a piece that we toured America with. I had to do an improvisation, imagining myself in a condemned cell. And it had a very profound impact on me. I've never forgotten it. Sitting in that confined space, imagining that I would never leave it alive. And I still feel it to this day, the memory of that experience. But of course, when I thought about what it might be to be in prison, I considered that a person in prison, sitting in a small room, would be spending a great deal of time there on their own without any kind of skill or ability to deal with that loneliness. And I reflected that I, in Thailand, had been living in the forest. I'd been living in remote places, in small rooms, in small huts. So I had that experience. I knew what it was like to sit through the night, alone in this dark place with no light, nothing to do except to practice meditation, except to be in touch with what was going on in my mind. And of course, I was doing that deliberately, to use that to develop my own understanding. And I considered that that experience might then be of use to people who were imprisoned and who had to endure an enforced solitude. So I started going to the prisons. I thought there were only 2 or 3 prisons in England at the time. I didn't realize there were 140. And as the prisoners I was seeing were moved, so they expected me to follow them to their new jail. And in a very short space of time, I was travelling all over the country to different prisons. And it got a bit much. So, with the help of 1 or 2 people who'd taken an interest in this work, we decided to create an organisation which we called Angulimala, the Buddhist Prison Chaplaincy. And that we did in 1985, and I've been the spiritual director of Angulimala, the Buddhist Prison Chaplaincy, since that time. Everyone here, I'm sure, knows the story of Angulimala. It's a very profound and important story, because it demonstrates that even in the worst of the experiences, a person can change, can be quite different. Angulimala, as you all know, was a serial killer. He met the Buddha. He met a person who had no anger, no fear. He was used to people opposing him, fighting him, being afraid of him. He wasn't used to someone who could treat him with that pure mind, with a mind of loving kindness. And it blew him away. And of course he changed. He became a disciple of the Buddhas. He became a Buddhist monk. He became an arahant. So in the most extreme circumstances, a person can make those kinds of changes. And we ought to reflect too that people in prison actually are like all of us. They are people who have their likes and their dislikes, their loves and their hates. They are brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, sons and daughters. They are people who, for some reason or another, have done something which has offended against society. And unfortunately, way back, certainly in England, the way of dealing with someone who offended against society was to transport them, to exile them, to send them far away, to send them to Australia and forget about them. Well, we can't do that anymore. Australia wouldn't accept them now. So we have to do something else. But it's still a kind of process of exile, to put people away from society and in a prison, and hopefully just forget about them and they'll be out of the way and do no more harm. The trouble is that it doesn't work, because now people will come out of prison. And unfortunately, generally speaking, people haven't thought that through. Society hasn't really thought that through. So we have people in prison, enduring imprisonment, and one day going to come out. When we created Angulimala Buddhist Prison Chaplaincy, our aim was to make available in the prisons of the United Kingdom Buddhism, Buddhist teaching and practice. And to do that, I obviously couldn't do it by myself. I had to find a team of people to go into the prisons, 140 prisons. So I have a team. I had to go to the different groups, different Buddhist societies and groups in England, and sell them the idea of creating this Buddhist prison chaplaincy and asking for recruits, asking for people who would become Buddhist prison chaplains. I have a team of around about 50 people. It fluctuates, there's always someone leaving and 2 or 3 people joining. So it fluctuates around about 50. And these are people who are from different Buddhist traditions. So I have people who are from Tibetan traditions, I have people from Thai Theravada traditions, I have people from Zen traditions, Soto Zen, different Zen groups, I have people from Thich Nhat Hanh's group, I have people from the Western Buddhist Order group, a lot of different people. And we get on extremely well, I'm happy to say, though I've had to become rather more diplomatic in my dealings to keep all this together. And I have to deal with the prison service. Nowadays, because I've been doing this so long, and I'm quite well known in the prisons, I'm not very well known anywhere else, but in the prisons I am. I'm the Buddhist advisor to the prison service in England and Wales. So I have a certain stature, I suppose you would say, within the prison system. And I'm also very well known amongst some of our most dangerous people. So be careful. Recruiting this team, of course, involved getting people who would be willing to go to the prisons and people who would be living and practicing Buddhism to a certain standard with a certain degree of understanding. Within that standard, I've demanded that everyone, all these Buddhist prison chaplains, and they're all lay people apart from half a dozen Zen monks, I've demanded that they observe the 5 precepts properly. And that includes the 5th precept, properly. Because you see, in the West, several Buddhist groups have watered down the 5th precept to make it a bit more convenient. So the tendency amongst some of them is to say that you're observing the 5th precept so long as you can still stand, so long as you're not completely sloshed. That's all right. That's drinking in moderation. Well, I won't have that. Because these Buddhist prison chaplains have to also be showing a good example. We don't want people who are just going to, like politicians and all sorts of leaders these days, say one thing and do another. In our prisons, certainly in the prisons of the United Kingdom, we have a huge number of people with alcohol and drug problems, serious problems. In fact, I mean, years ago as an actor, like most actors, I used to drink, and sometimes quite heavily. I never imagined I would be exhorting people to give up alcohol. But the damage that I've seen that it's done is utterly appalling. People's lives completely changed. People I've known in prison who have done serious crimes, terrible murders, about which they can remember nothing because of what they were affected by, the drugs and the alcohol. This is a serious matter. And it makes me weep nearly that the Buddhist community isn't properly upholding that fifth precept and showing a good example to the rest of society and pointing out the dangers in using that drug, because alcohol is a serious drug and probably more trouble than the other hard drugs that we know about. So I have to be quite strict about this, and I have people come to me wanting to be Buddhist prison chaplains, and I interview them, and I ask them about the fifth precept, and they say, well, I just have the occasional beer. I say, well, can you give that up? Oh, I don't know. I better go home and ask my wife. Or one particular chap who came to me, who was an Irishman. Oh, it's part of my Irish tradition. All this, but claiming to be Buddhist practitioners, claiming to be devoted to the Bodhisattva. They don't understand. When I started, when I began to practice Buddhism, when I began to practice meditation, I was then still a layman. I didn't at first take on the 5 precepts. I was drinking, but I soon stopped because it soon became apparent to me that you can't mix meditation and alcohol. It just doesn't work. I couldn't bear the loss of control that I was, of course, trying to develop as I practiced meditation and mindfulness. So, this is the standard I set, and I often have to say to a person, well, you better go home and think about it. I'd love you to be part of this team, the Angkor team, but you must observe the 5th precept properly. Every quarter, I have a sort of gathering of these Buddhist prison chaplains. They don't really get much in the way of training, and it's very difficult to train people to do this kind of thing, because all our prisons are rather different. The prison service is supposed to give them some training in security matters, and security in our prisons has increased enormously over the last few years. We have to go through a very intense vetting process now. But to teach them how to impart Buddhist teaching in the prisons isn't so very easy because the prisons are so different. Basically, we have different categories of prison. Some are high security, category A, category B, and then we have a category C, which is for people who have done relatively serious crime, but not sufficient to require a great deal of supervision. And then we have what are known as open prisons, category D prisons, where there's no fence and where the inmates will often go out to work, come back to the prison at night, or even go and study and come back to the prison at night. And we have to try and operate within the daily routine of these different prisons within the times that we're permitted. So it can be a little bit difficult. We also have a huge range of people. We have some people who are very poorly educated, who can barely read and write. We have some people who are great scholars, who are very well educated people. We have people who come from poor backgrounds, people from wealthy backgrounds. A great range of talent is to be found in our prisons. So, learning to adapt to all this is a little bit difficult. In these quarterly workshops, I gather as many as I can each time, and we talk through some of the changes that are happening in our prisons. We talk through some of the problems, the difficulties that people are having, and if I can, I have a guest speaker from the prison service. So this year, for each workshop, I have a different guest speaker. And over the years, I've had all the chief inspectors of the prisons come to us. This year, I have the ombudsman coming to the next session. I have the deputy director of prisons coming to the session after that. I have the new chaplain general coming to the meeting after that. And these people give to our Buddhist prison chaplains a sort of sense of what the prison service is. It's more than just the prison that they go into. It gives them a better sort of perspective of what the prison service is about and what it's trying to do. Now, to come back to prisoners and what we do. First of all, people sometimes say to me, it must be difficult teaching Buddhism in a prison. And I say, well, actually, it's a lot easier to teach Buddhism in prison than outside. When I was in England with Ajahn Chah in 1977, I took him to visit my parents. And it was very bad weather that day, and we went out, and we called it a relative's house. Very well-to-do, middle-class English people. And it was Sunday afternoon. So it was, of course, traditional Sunday afternoon tea. So we were there. Ajahn Chah and I were plonked on a sofa at one end of the room, and these people were sitting round the table, drinking their tea, clinking their teacups, and eating their cake, and chatting away. And after a while, Ajahn Chah nudged me in the ribs, asked them if they suffer, he said, in Thai. So I thought, I was just about to say, this is not the time or place to be talking about suffering. And the room went quiet. These people at the tea table realized that the great man had said something, and they were suddenly all ears to hear what he'd said. So I was trapped. I had to translate, and I had to say, well, he wants to know if you suffer. And they giggled a bit, and they were a bit embarrassed, and in the end I had to say to Rinpoche, I had to say, my Kanjai, they don't understand. And that's how it is when people are reasonably prosperous, when they have the things that they want. They don't think about suffering. If you ask them, do you suffer? They won't know what you're talking about. I had a group of ladies come to my group one evening, my meditation class somewhere. And two or three of them were quite interested. One of them had no interest at all. She'd come along with her friends. And of course, I'd spoken about suffering. At the end of it, she said, I don't know what you're talking about, going on about suffering. I don't suffer. So I said to her, do you ever catch cold? Oh, yes, she said. I said, do you ever cry? Oh, yes, she said. I said, do you ever have any aches and pains? Oh, yes, she said. I said, do you ever feel sad? Oh yes, she said. Are you ever upset when you lose something? Oh yes, she said. And I went on and on like this until I couldn't think of anything else to say. And eventually I said, and do you suffer? No, she said. Difficult, isn't it? Now, in the prisons it's quite different. Do you think about it? You're locked up, you're taken away, and you're locked up. You can't go home. A man I know who worked with the immigration service told me about someone they caught coming in illegally, or had something on them, rather, that they shouldn't have had. And after they'd done all the process and they'd filled in the forms, this woman said, can I go now? I've got to go home and feed my child. No, you can't go. That's what imprisonment means. You can't go home. You want to go and see your husband or your wife, your child? Sorry. 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. You're not going home. We have some people in the prison who have come from other countries. They're not going to go home for 20 or 30 years. You imagine what that's like. That's in prison. Now, think about it. The prison isn't too bad. It's a building. Mostly the roof doesn't leak. It's relatively warm. In fact, sometimes it's too warm. You've got 3 meals a day. Not quite what you'd like to eat, but it's not bad. If you're ill, you can see the doctor. He may not be the best doctor in the world, but you know, you've got the basics of existence. Could be a lot worse. There's a lot of people in this world who won't be eating at all today. But in prison in England, you will. So what's the problem? Where's your suffering coming from? You can't go home. You can't go and do the things you want to do. You want to do. You can't do what you want to do. Where's the suffering coming from? It's coming from your desire, isn't it? Your desire to be elsewhere, your desire to do something else, your desire not to be there. It becomes very simple to teach prisoners the Four Noble Truths. Not difficult. They appreciate it pretty quickly. Suffering, the cause of suffering. Then you could say, well, if you could clear up that, if you weren't desiring to be somewhere else, if you weren't attached to your family and friends and wealth and whatever it is, then you could be free of yourself. How to do that? The fourth noble truth. The Noble Eightfold Path. So we explain that. Of course, many of the prisoners who come to me initially, they come because they're interested in meditation. They want to be able to train their minds. They want to... Thank you. They want... They want to be able to train their minds. They want to be able to be more at peace. some of them think that they can, as it were, escape the prison in their minds. One or two of them have even read books which suggest they might have sort of psychic powers and be able to fly over the wall. But certainly they feel that there's a chance that they can at least escape the pain of being in prison. So they're interested in meditation. So we practice meditation. They don't know really anything about the different schools of Buddhism. It takes them a long time, despite our efforts to learn much about the Satipatthana Sutta or the various teachings of Buddhism. But they appreciate that they suffer. They appreciate that changing their minds would help them. If they could be more peaceful, if they could live in a more aware state, things would be better. And so we practice like that. Technique, they're not so wedded to. They're certainly not that concerned about the different schools of Buddhism. They're concerned about changing their mind. And my background was generally that people should just practice meditation. If you practice meditation, you keep your mind relatively still, you become more aware, things change for you. And I've got a good story to tell you. I have to be very careful with these stories because I mustn't let on who these people are. But one particular man that I know in prison, he spent a long time in solitary confinement. I've known him for many years. And he never told me to begin with why he'd become interested in Buddhism, why he wanted to speak to me. But eventually he told me the story. In his confinement, he had to be checked every 15 minutes. So he's alone in this small room, locked up all the time. And every 15 minutes, a guard comes, has a look, goes away. Generally speaking, prisoners don't like the guards much. He hated them. So, he thought he'd wind them up by being a Buddhist. He didn't know anything about Buddhism, but he'd seen pictures, and he knew the Buddhists did this. Sat cross-legged, like that. So every time the guards came to the hatch, he'd be there. Next time, he knew the time, being a Buddhist. Sometimes they were late coming. So he was stuck there for 5 minutes, being a Buddhist. Sometimes they forgot to come. He was stuck there for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour. After a few months of this, he thought to himself, something's happening. That man is a changed man. He's not very interested in the traditions of Buddhism. He's become, I can tell you, a very wise man. He understands very well the fundamentals of Buddhism, of really what it's about. He goes on to continue the Four Noble Truths. Get to grips with that. It's a marvelous story. It's a good story because there you are. You change your mind in a very simple way. You don't have to be wedded to any particular technique. You change your life. So this is what we do. This is what I do 3 or 4 days a week in the different prisons. Very simple. We don't talk much about the technique. techniques or the difficult teachings of Buddhism. We keep it pretty simple, pretty direct, and people make changes. And that's really what it's all about. To change, to transform, to be happier and better people. And I say to them, you know, you're doing this for you. You're not doing this for me. You're not doing this for the government. Of course, there's lots of programs and things that are offered to them, all with carrots, like, you know, you can get slightly earlier release or something like that. When it's like that, you're doing it for someone else. This practice, you do for yourself. Now, I know all this is supposed to be like mindfulness. Well, mindfulness is an essential ingredient in the Buddhist practice. You don't get away from that. That's there. But I also want to just say something else, because people don't really understand why people commit crime. You can have a whole family, or 2 or 3 people in the family, growing up in the same way, enduring the same difficulties. One commits crime, another doesn't. Why is it? Why do people commit crime? We know sometimes it's because there's an opportunity, a chance to get rich, all that stuff. I think, having observed people for a long time, that anger and aversion is part of the reason. And we've discovered that the practice of metta, loving kindness, has become very important. And that's part of the practice that we offer people, to practice metta bhavana, loving kindness. And particularly, and especially, loving kindness for oneself. We hear it again and again about people having low self-esteem. What's that? But not liking yourself. So this has become an important practice, as well as mindfulness, as well as the meditation practice, to encourage people to cultivate mindfulness. I was asked to leave some time for questions, so I'd be very happy if any of you would like to ask me something, to try and answer you. I don't know what that is.
Thank you very much. Now it's time for Q&A. If you have questions, raise your hand first, state your name and your country, and then make the question straight to the point and short. Thank you.
It's a very short question. I was wondering if you are dealing with female prisoners. Is there both genders in the prison that you work with?
Yes, but we don't have as many women in prison. I mean, we have around about 83,000, 84,000 people in prison. And of those, say, 84,000, something like 4,000 or 5,000 of them. So it's much fewer. And I don't very often go to the women's prisons. Occasionally I do, but it's a bit difficult for me as a monk. So I don't very often do that. But I do have women going into the women's prisons, and I do have some feedback from the difficulties, because they're rather more different in the women's prisons. But I do have feedback about it, and yes, we do have.
Okay, next question, please.
My name is Venerable Chen Hui. I'm a graduate student at IBSC, MCU Majula, and I come from China. And my question is, do you think that British prisoners are the best meditators in the world? Have you ever experienced anything like they practice very well and you think that they have already achieved sainthood? And the question is based on the facts from your speech that they enjoyed a lot of solitude, isolation from distractions, and well-moderate accommodation, and also from the Dharma guidance, spiritual guidance from you. So that is the background of this question. So can you give me an answer? Thank you.
I didn't catch the first bit of the question.
The first question is, do you think that the prisoners in UK are the best meditators in the world?
I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't go that far at all. I mean, from one perspective, prison is often imagined by people to be a very good place to practice it, because you have solitude and you have all that you need, and people imagine that it's like the ideal monastery. It's not quite like that. And some of the prisons are extremely noisy and violent. There's a certain amount of violence. Even if there isn't actually fighting, there can be quite a tense atmosphere. And noise. You know, in a high security prison, every prisoner has his own cell, quite small. And amongst the possessions he will have will be a small television and maybe even a small sound system. So they've all got their own different sound system or television going all at once. So it's bedlam in some of these places, the noise. So it can be difficult to find a time when it's reasonably quiet and when you can practice and when you're not going to be disturbed by someone. So, in a way, they're not very ideal places. But then, at least one prisoner told me the other day he thought it was an ideal place to practice. And he'd cottoned on to what monastic practice can be like. Because, of course, people imagine the monastic practice is all peaceful. Like living, you know, on the top of a mountain, on a cloud, and everything's wonderful. Whereas, of course, monastic practice isn't like that at all. Especially living in the forest, because you're living there with yourself. And sometimes that can be much tougher than people imagine. We've had several people I've seen come to forest monasteries full of ideas and lasting 3 days, 3 weeks. No time at all, because they can't take it. But in that sense, the prisons are good training grounds, because you do have to deal with yourself, you have to deal with your relationship with other people, which can be quite difficult, and you have got the chance there to observe your kilesa, just as in a good monastery you have the opportunity to observe the nature of your kilesa.
Dr. Taji Sangmo, do you have a question?
Yes.
Okay. The last question, I take the last question. Yes.
Okay. Can I?
Yes.
All right. Good afternoon, Venerable. It took me a long while before I met you here. Even I tried to make contact with you, even over the email or letter, because from Australia we had struggling to set up the chaplaincy service to the prisons. But it seems to me that it's not been very much successful as you have done in the UK. We have put effort to build up the chaplaincy service into different areas like nursing home, university. Even we already start to set up chaplaincy in military services. But in prison, still a big question where I'm not sure whether how UK government to legislate about your chaplaincy service over there. But time to time, in case of me, I'm not professional chaplaincy, but 20 or 15 years ago, when I got invitation from a social worker in a prison nearby my monastery, asking to visit the prison in occasion of Lunar New Year. This is a bit of a cultural visit rather than religious visit, and absolutely not a chaplaincy duty. And my question is how you can, whether you could help to produce sample documentation, how Buddhist people in different countries speak English speaking, to follow your sample or to learn from your experience and knowledge built up over the last 40 years. So you just said to start in their own country, because they know such sort of, written documentation about how to start, how to run, how to deal with such sort of duty. I think prisoner is the most suffering people in the relatively secular world, and then they really need to have some kind of support, spiritual support, like you just said. But I'm not sure the legislation will be same in different country, but in Australia, for example, when a person becomes a prisoner, they have to put in record whether they are member of any religious faith or not. If they put none, and then later on they are not allowed to see a monk or join the Buddhist activity in the prison. And there are not many people who put in the record and they are Buddhists while they were transferred into the prison. That is another limitation, how we could not get more and more people in the prison when we have a chaplain man or person to go to prison. It's not a suitable time to discuss in depth on this issue, but I mean that Constituent, you are an issue at the pioneer of the prisoner service in the UK, and I think the world need to learn from you a lot. And if you could keep in your mind that if you could produce sample video, sample written instruction, so to start and to run and to how to help people in prison. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm sometimes asked to write something about all this, and I've so far avoided it because it's a difficult topic to write about, really. But I better just explain that when I first started going into the prisons, yes, every prisoner has to declare his religious affiliation, his or her religious affiliation when they go in. And in the past, of course, Britain was a very different country from what it is now. So, I mean, when I was young, we didn't have many people from overseas. I sometimes have had to tell people that I was about probably 17 or 18 before I saw a black man. Perhaps 18 or 19 before I'd seen a Sri Lankan person. Where I lived, we had no people, we were all white English people. And we thought it was strange when I was at school, when a Quaker joined the school. We knew nothing about Islam or Hinduism or Buddhism. I didn't know, as I said earlier, I was 22 before I knew anything about the Buddha, who the Buddha was. But of course, Britain has changed now a lot, and we have people from all over the world, in London particularly. And as Britain has changed, so the prisons have had to change and adapt. So when I began, the chaplaincy was in the hands of the Church of England, and we were, what were we called? We were called ministers of other faiths or something like that. But then in about, well, it was the same year we launched Angulimala, I got to know a very extraordinary person called Lord Avebury. Lord Avebury, of course, sat in the House of Lords. And he was a very wonderful man, really. A very compassionate man, and he was a Buddhist. He'd become a Buddhist when he'd gone to Sri Lanka as part of a parliamentary group to observe an election there. And he became a great friend and a great helper and sort of my student as well. So it was a kind of complex relationship. But he was, because of his position, able to help to get things better for us in the prisons. And we used to spend a lot of time together and on the phone trying to sort of manipulate things to improve matters for the Buddhist prisoners. And that had a bearing on what the government eventually decided to do in about 1999. I guess 98, 99.
How many Buddhist chaplains do you already have now in your team?
Sorry?
How many Buddhist chaplains you had in your service now?
In my team, 50.
Yes, 50.
50.
Wow.
But at that time, about 98, the government changed its policy and started moving quickly to multi-faith chaplaincy. Before then it was a struggle, but then it became government policy in the prisons for a multi-faith chaplaincy. It isn't perfect, but I would say it leads the world. But it isn't perfect, but it's still, every prison is supposed to have a multi-faith team. So, and it depends a bit on the demographic of the prison, but there's supposed to be Christian chaplains of different denominations, and a Hindu chaplain, a Muslim chaplain, and a Buddhist chaplain, and even now a pagan chaplain. And we have certain responsibilities now, and there are demands put on us, because it's now written into the prison service instruction that each prisoner should have the opportunity to practice his or her faith for 1 hour each week, and also for there to be 1 hour devoted to study, if it can be arranged. So that's now quite good. But it puts a demand on us, because all the prisons now are demanding of me that I find a Buddhist chaplain for them. And sometimes that's difficult. In some areas, there are very few, or perhaps no Buddhists. So it can be quite difficult.
I wish that around this Southeast Asia, mostly Buddhist country like Thailand, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Nepal, so on. So if we could set up the prisoner service, chaplain service for the prisoner like that, it's wonderful, because most people, I can say, are more people in Buddhist faith than others. And then it really demanding duty for a Sangha in this region to follow your step, to do things like that, because this is the best help for them, because they, but then only in certain country where the government policy forbid the practice of any religion, they're not allowed the monk or priest visiting a prisoner, like China, Vietnam, and so on.
There's something we've done which is quite important, because in Britain at the moment there are quite a lot of Buddhists, but it's very fragmented. We've got different groups, different styles. We've got no means of communicating with the whole Buddhist community. And I notice when I go in the prisons, I always see the copies of the Muslim news. They have a newspaper. We don't have anything like that, which is a great shame. With Angulimala, the Buddhist prison chaplaincy, we do represent the whole Buddhist community. We have people from nearly all the different groups. And that's a strength. When we're together like that, we have a strength. And the government and so on will listen to us. So that's one very important development. Had we not formed Angulimala, we would have been in a weak position. And it would have taken a long time to
Venerable sir, do you mean that they know Sangha body, even not control each other, but they align or affiliate or Sangha together in one group? Like in Australia, we formed 10, 12 years ago, we formed Australian Sangha Association, or tradition joined and so on like that. You don't have anybody like that?
We have, yes. For the Theravada months, I initiated it. So we do have a group now called TBS UK, Theravada Buddhist Sangha in the UK, and I'm the chairman of that. But one tradition only, yes.
May I humbly interrupt the conversation, because you're a little bit behind our schedule. Thank you very much for that. And thank you for a very wonderful speech and clarification of questions from the audience. Before we go to the next speaker, may I call upon Venerable Professor Dr. Hansa Damahaso, our Director of ABSC, to present the offerings as a token of appreciation. Will your staff take the glass away from the stage, please? So next we will begin with our next speaker. He's from Hungary, and in the morning he's the moderator of the first session, and his topic will be Common Ground, brief comparison of traditional and contemporary mindfulness, possibilities and challenges in the field of mindfulness-based programs. His name is Gabor Seskas from Hungary. And I think the audience wants to listen from you more than me, so I will give a very brief introduction about yourself. Okay. So he has been teaching mindfulness-based stress reduction and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy for more than 10 years. And now currently at the National Institute of Oncology in Hungary. He's the president of the Hungarian Mindfulness and Contemplative Association located in Budapest. And he's the founding member and the president there, as well as the president of association. He organized one-day mindfulness forums and for university in Hungary in the year 2017 and 2018. He had the honor to give the opening keynote at the 3rd International Conference on Mindfulness organized by the International Association of Buddhist University here in Thailand from Mahachulalongkorn Victoria University in the year 2017. So please the audience welcome Professor Gabor Seskas.
Dear venerables, dear ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to be here with you and to be the one of the hosts of this event, of this World Mindfulness Forum. And we've been working hard with the teachers and representatives of the MCU University, Mahachulalongkorn University, but I thought I will be standing there. Now I feel a bit different standing here on this big stage. And yeah, before I go on to my presentation, first I would like to thank for the kind invitation, for the conference team, and of course for everyone who supported me, my family members, my teachers, my friends, and to all of you here. And I recognize there's a beautiful greeting style in Thailand. It's very different because in Hungary, if we meet each other, we shake hands or embrace each other. And I would like to invite you to practice Thai Wai to each other. Okay. And I invite you not toward me, but toward your neighbors sitting next to you, if you like the idea. You can turn to the left or turn to the right, and you can practice you. And perhaps you can read it or not. I was a practitioner. John Kabat-Zinn mentioned in his talk that we met in a meditation center in Germany. I practice in the lineage of Willigis Jäger. He's a Benedictine priest and Zen master. And he's more than 92 years old, he's not active. And my personal teacher is Doris Seos. She's also a Zen master, Dharma Hair of Willigis Jäger, and I started my Koan studies with her. But I also visited retreats with other teachers, as for example, in the lineage. I'm a member of the Hungarian Sangha belonging to the lineage of the great Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, and I also visit the retreats of the Hungarian Sangha belonging to the lineage of Venerable Dr. Khmer Dhammasami. And the title of my presentation is Common Ground, Traditional and Contemporary Mindfulness. And in the second half of my presentation, I will talk about the possibilities and challenges in the field of mindfulness-based applications. So, it turns out to be that I cannot read the front screen, but I wrote the presentation, so I know it more or less. So my presentation will be about, first, I have to admit I'm neither a scholar nor a scientist. I'm a leader of a small Hungarian organization, the Hungarian Association of Mindfulness and Other Contemplative Practice-Based Applications. And as a leader, you should know different fields well, or at least a little bit. And my presentation will be like a mix of different fields. I will not go into details, but we will talk about a little bit the Buddha Dhamma, a short comparison based on the Satipatthana Sutta. I will introduce you a little bit of the theory of scientific theory behind the contemporary mindfulness-based applications. I will give you a short overview of some traditions, world traditions, and that they provide comprehensive teachings, and all of them include teachings of ethics. And then perhaps it will be, usually legal stuff is boring, but perhaps it could be the most important or most interesting part of my presentation. I will introduce you some core decisions on transcendental meditation and yoga in public schools in the United States. And finally, I will introduce you some possibilities how we can teach mindfulness and ethics together. Should it be taught in a secular or in a religious way? So, we start with the Satipatthana Sutta, and in the beginning you can read, and I have to go a bit closer. This is the only way, and I use different translation for some words. Right in the beginning, ekaya, you can find these different translations for this word. This is the only way, or this is the direct path, or this is a most wonderful way, because for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the destruction of suffering and grief, for the disappearance of pain and distress, for reaching the right path, for the attainment of Nibbana, namely the four arousing, establishing, or the four foundations of mindfulness. And the two most well-known applications of mindfulness, namely mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, SIC have the similar or the same purpose. I would say similar purpose. My MBSR has in the name use the word stress, and sometimes the word dukkha. Usually it is translated as suffering, but sometimes it is also translated as stress or distress. And we could read in the beginning of the sutta that for the disappearance of pain and distress, suffering and grief, first MBSR was offered for patients with chronic pain. And the second is MBCT, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, addresses depression. And as you know, some of the symptoms of depression could be sorrow and lamentation. These are the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and namely the first part is the contemplation on the body, or kaya. My Pali is not perfect, so please. And the second part is contemplation of feelings, or Vedana. The third part is a contemplation of the mind, or chitta, or consciousness. The third part is contemplation on the content of the mind, or dhammas. We go one by one, and first I will show you what you can find in contemporary mindfulness-based applications, and later on I will show what you cannot find word by word. But in the end, my reasoning is that what you cannot find in contemporary mindfulness-based applications, it does not mean that they are totally absent. So we also teach, we start with mindfulness of breathing and mindfulness of postures, walking, standing, sitting, and lying down. We don't give teachings word by word on clear comprehension or the recursiveness of the body, the 32 parts of the body like flesh, skin, or hair, or fur, and so on. We do not teach about the 4 material elements, earth, water, air, and earth, water, air, and fire. Yeah, thank you very much. And we do not teach about the 9 cemetery contemplation. We also encourage our participants to pay attention, to notice, to recognize pleasant or unpleasant, or neither pleasant nor unpleasant or neutral feelings. But we do not make a distinction if these are worldly or spiritual feelings. Of course, it's understandable these are secular applications many times in public institutions. And the first foundation of mindfulness, it's a very important part in contemporary mindfulness-based applications. And we also encourage our participants during the meditation practices to carefully watch their thoughts and their emotions. Whereas we may not use the same categorization as you can find in the Satipatthana Sutta, but this is my reasoning that if they start to meditate, they can realize some of these insights. So we never teach directly. We never use the word anicca or anatta, but many of them come to realizations like they have a idea of fixed self, and when they come to watch their thoughts and emotions, they realize that they are in a constant change, and we do not teach word by word the 5 hindrances or the 7 factors of enlightenment or the 4 noble truths or the noble eightfold path. So we can say that contemporary mindfulness teaches less than it is written in the Satipatthana Sutta, but on the other hand, teaches something else, or we can say more, because it is a combination of mindfulness practices and modern science. And what we could see in the past century, or in the past decades, that these disciplines, I mean contemplative traditions and modern science, were strictly separated. And what we can see now, that these two disciplines coming closer to each other, and hopefully they are interested in each other's knowledge and each other's wisdom. And modern or contemporary mindfulness-based applications, as I see, we can put them in this overlap. So they are a kind of combination of scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom. And you could see this chart. John showed it to you, and it tells you why they become so popular, modern or contemporary mindfulness-based application, because hundreds of scientific researches prove the efficacy, the efficiency of these mindfulness-based applications regarding certain problems. And that's why we call them evidence-based programs. And I try to put on one chart the roots of the first mindfulness-based program, the MBSR. John Kabat-Zinn, I think he told about it, that he was a practitioner, Zen practitioner in the lineage of the Korean Zen master Sun San. But he also studied with teachers of the Insight Meditation Society, Joseph Goldstein, Sharon Salter, Jeff Cornfield, and each of them lived in South and East Asia for years and studied with masters like Mahasi Sayadaw or Goenkaji. And this is one part of the story. The other part is science. And I put only one picture on the left. He is, perhaps some of you know, Hans Seyer, or in Hungarian, because he was a Hungarian, Shein János. He worked out first the scientific theory of stress. And what we can find in MBSR, it is the theory, or it's making a distinction between the stress reaction and mindful response in a stressful situation. Because let's see what happens when we get into a stressful situation. You know, stressors can be external, as for example, a morning call at 5 o'clock or 5:35 in the morning, like this morning, that despite your jet lag, you have to get up and get out of the bed. And they could be internal as well, your bodily sensations or your emotions and your thoughts. And what happens? You may fall into an automatic stress reaction. What happens? You get into a state of acute hyperarousal, stress hormones. The stress hormones will increase in your blood pressure will increase, and if it happens or frequently, or if it lasts for long, you get into a state of chronic hyperarousal, and it can be characterized with you can have a higher blood pressure, or you can have problems with sleeping, or you become anxious. And of course, people would like to reduce the tension in their body, reduce stress. And if you're not mindful, you can choose maladaptive coping strategies or self-destructing behaviors, like like addictions. In the previous presentation, Kemadamo mentioned alcohol, for example, can be one of the examples, or any kind of other drugs, or overeating, or hyperactivity. And perhaps it may help you reduce stress on the short term. On the long term, they will lead to a physical or mental breakdown. But it's not necessary to fall into the automatic stress response or stress reaction cycle and go all the way through this vicious stress circle. If you practice mindfulness, you may become aware of your bodily sensations, your emotions, your feelings, your thoughts, and you may, if you practice, you can see clearly the situation more clearly, and you can choose better, healthier responses to the situation. For example, emotion-focused strategies or problem-focused strategies, and you can see the new options. So this is, in brief, the theory of the mindful response in stressful situations. And now let's see, very brief, for two pictures, the MBCT program. Originally, we planned that Antonia Sumbundu, MBCT teacher trainer from the Oxford Mindfulness Center, will introduce you MBCT. But she couldn't come. In brief, MBCT combines mindfulness practices and CBT exercises. CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. And on the picture, on the second picture, you can see the developer of CBT, Aaron Beck. And on the first picture, perhaps you cannot see well, but there are four gentlemen. We can see the fathers of MBCT on the picture on the top. Namely Mark Williams. He was at that time the director of the Oxford Mindfulness Center. And the second is John Teasdale. He was a professor of the Cambridge University. Third one is John Kabat-Zinn, and the fourth one is Zinder Segal. And they worked out the MBCT program the way that they had the idea that if we combine meditative practice with CBT, it could be useful for patients who have had depressive periods in their life. Because the problem with depression, that the more episodes you have, the higher the probability that you will get depressed again. And MBCT found to be effective in the prevention of relapse into depression. And these are some of the beneficial effects of mindfulness practice. I mentioned some of them from the psychological side. It reduces stress, anxiety, it reduces the probability of relapse into depression, and you can perform better if you practice mindfulness, because your attentional skills or your memory or learning skills will improve if you practice mindfulness, or you can make better decisions. And as I mentioned, blood pressure, sleep problems may improve as well, and your immune response may improve as well. And please hands up if you know about this report. This is the Mindful Nation report from 2015. Oh, I didn't see too many hands. This report was prepared by a group of parliamentarians and scientists. They worked on it for 1 year, and the name of the group, very interesting, Mindfulness All-Party Parliamentary Group in the British government, British Parliament, Parliament of the UK. And this is a 50 pages report, and it includes recommendation, and it says that we should examine the effects of mindfulness, and if we can spread mindfulness-based program on certain fields of the society. And they mentioned namely four areas. The first one, of course, healthcare. There is a strong evidence, a strong body of evidence that MBCT and MBSR are efficient. And the second one is the field of education. The third one is the field of the workplace, and the fourth one is criminal justice. And now I would like to give you a short overview of about the teachings of some world traditions, namely the Buddhist, the Yoga, and Christian path. We could hear about the free trainings, or the free for trainings in one of the previous presentations. And it starts with the practice of Shila, and you go on to practice training of the mind, or higher training of the mind, and practicing wisdom. And we can do this categorization for the Noble Eightfold Path, namely right view and right thought, or right intention belongs to the wisdom part, right speech, right action, and right livelihood makes the virtue part. And as you know, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration make the concentration part. And it all starts with the 5 precepts. And if we look at the yoga path, according to the sutras, Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, we can also find an eightfold path, but the limbs, or the names of the limbs are different, as you can see. Yama, or restraints, niyamas, these deal with the conduct, how we behave. Then asana, pranayama, pratyahara. Asana means body postures, pranayama, breath control, breath exercises. Pratyahara means withdrawal of the senses. They deal with the practice body. They deal with the body. And the 6th, 7th, and 8th limbs, or the final steps on the spiritual path of the yoga, makes the meditation part. And if we look at the yamas, they are very similar to the 5 precepts. And in very brief, the Christian path, János Ferenc is one of the most well-known Hungarian Christian contemplation teachers. Sometimes he makes this free he mentioned this threefold path regarding the Christian tradition. You start to practice the 10 commandments. This is the moral or ethical base of the practice. Then you start to read and follow the teachings of Jesus, it is similar like reading the suttas in the Buddhist traditions. And in the final step, you practice contemplation, or as he says, dwelling in the presence of God. And now we get to the point which is, I think, will be most important or most relevant in this presentation, to some core decisions. Please hands up if you know about these core decisions. Is there anyone in the room? No. Okay. It's a legal analysis, and I read it. It's a paper which was awarded first place in a law student writing competition. And according to the paper, it was you can read about this paper in some later publications. There is a boom for meditation classes in public schools in the US, and programs like Quiet Time, it is based on transcendental meditation, and other programs like Inner Peace Mindful Schools or Mind Up, these are based on mindfulness meditation, are very popular. And the benefits are well known, as I mentioned already. They reduce anxiety, increase academic performance, and reduce misbehavior and aggression between students. But critics say that meditation and other spiritual practices are like a Trojan horse. They bring religion into public institutions. And I think this is a critic which we have to consider. And please, you can tell out loud if you know any of these guys. Do you see the picture well? No. Perhaps you cannot see it well. On the picture on the left, or the first picture, you can see the Beatles. Perhaps you know Beatles. Please hands up if you know Beatles. Yeah. And in the middle you can see Maharishi Maharsh Yogi, and he was the founder, or he was the prominent teacher of the transcendental meditation. And you can see on the right another famous famous American director. Perhaps you know if you see his name, or I tell it to you. Director David Lynch. He was the director of Twin Peaks, for example. And back to 1979, the court found that transcendental meditation, together in a unit with a subject called Science of Creative Intelligence, violated the Establishment Clause. And the practice itself, transcendental meditation, they found that it was not really in itself unconstitutional, but together with the subject, with a theoretical subject, it violated the Establishment Clause. And let's see what was the reasoning behind it. The court decision was based on 3 factors. Now, since then it is called the Mana test. First, these teachings concern fundamental or imponderable issues, and then these teachings were complex enough, making a comprehensive belief system. And they used formal symbols of an organized religion. For example, within this subject or in this unit, they used a ceremony called puja. And yeah, we don't have time to go into the details. And this is another court decision in just 6 years ago. The San Diego County Superior Court found that yoga in general was religious. I showed you this chart before. If you take a look at the Eightfold Path, it gives you a complex spiritual path, a complex teaching. But the court found that the way it was taught in the schools did not violate the establishment clause. Because, and perhaps if you look at it, it's not the same chart, perhaps you cannot read it, but the way it was taught in the schools, the instructors taught students only body practices and breathing practices. And they didn't call them pranayama or asanas, but they used secular language for the courses. And now I'm going to summarize my presentation soon. I think there are different circumstances, and depending on the circumstances, there are different possibilities how we can teach mindfulness. And there's a long discussion about if we should include teachings on ethics, for example, into contemporary mindfulness applications, or how, if yes, how they should be integrated. Now let's see some possibilities. First, of course, this is the traditional way of teaching, and I put two logos on this chart. And of course, in a Buddhist environment, it is the best way to teach the whole Buddha Dhamma, and not only in Buddhist countries, but as for example in Hungary. My friend Gabor Kasha is sitting there. He's the rector of the Dharma Gate Buddhist College in Budapest. So there is a room, even in Western countries, to teach the whole of the Dhamma. So I put it on first place. This is one way. And we can see that there are some new mindfulness-based applications which integrate mindfulness practices with Buddhist ethics, namely the 5 precepts. This could be another way. If people are open, people are interested in Buddhist teachings, it could be another way. First, some of you know Ruth Beyer. Ruth Beyer is a psychologist, professor from the Oxford Mindfulness Center. He proposed in one of her articles a third way that mindfulness, contemporary mindfulness applications could be combined with self-chosen values or universal human virtues. On the top you can see acceptance and commitment therapy. It was work developed by Stephen Hayes. It combines mindfulness with self-chosen values. And on the bottom picture you can see Martin Seligman, and he, together with his team, they worked hard on 3 years, and they collected and somehow found some most universal human virtues, and these virtues could be combined with secular mainstream mindfulness programs. And on the third, I find it interesting that even from the religious side, there is an interest to teach ethics in a secular way. I don't think you see the upper two pictures, so I can tell you that those are the front pages of two books of the Dalai Lama, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Right after the millennia, he published a book on ethics for a new millennium, I think. Yeah, ethics for the new millennium. And 10 years later, the book Beyond Religion. And these are teachings about secular ethics. So they don't. In this book, His Holiness the Dalai Lama does not use the Buddhist language, but he makes the teachings accessible for people with different religions or those who don't practice any religion at all. And from the Christian side, perhaps some of you know Hans Kind is also famous for his work on world ethics. Finally, this is just only one chart. In my SIC, mindfulness programs and compassion trainings are like gifts or presents for the world. And Buddhism is a very rich tradition, and it has a lot to offer for this world. I think this process is not finished. So we've seen that MBSR is very popular nowadays, and MBCT is very popular nowadays. But I'm sure that we will see new applications and new ways of transmitting or handing over the essence of Dharma. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Gabor Fazizgalj. Now we have a few minutes for the Q&A session. If you have questions, please state your name, raise your hand, and your country. Any question from the audience? Yes? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a question for you. It looks like you have practiced both transcendental meditation and the Buddhist side of...
I did not practice transcendental meditation. Yes. I just brought an example into my presentation.
Okay, I was just going to ask whether what is the difference did you find, because some of the transcendental meditators really feel that Buddhists should learn that also. So anyway, it's okay.
Thank you. In addition to that, transcendental meditation was really popular in the 70s, in the end of the 70s and in the beginning of the 80s. And one of the reasons that it didn't make such a breakthrough like mindfulness-based applications, I think this poor decision. And I just brought it as an example. I don't know TM in details.
Okay, any more questions? Yes, please.
Hello, good afternoon, sir. Your topic is a brief comparison of traditional and contemporary mindfulness.
Sorry, Venerable, can you speak up? Speak a little bit louder, please. Thank you.
Contemporary mindfulness possibilities and challenges. My question is based on challenges because I like challenges. So, contemporary mindfulness is based on science, right? And traditional mindfulness is based on Buddhism, which is religion. So, on the science, from the perspective of science, why it is difficult to accept, like you said, court decision, they dismiss these kind of things as a religious, but there is science, mindfulness, contemporary mindfulness, which is based on science. So if something is based on science, why there is challenge to accept as a science without religion or something like that?
I'm not sure that if I get everything well, but first, in the presentation of John Kabat-Zinn, we could hear that contemporary mindfulness is not the denial of the Dhamma. As I see, these contemporary programs were developed by practitioners, and as I see them, they are these contemporary applications. They are based on the contemplative traditions, as I showed in the chart, and on science as well. And as I try to explain in my explanation, these disciplines were separated for centuries, and now we can see that these disciplines coming closer to each other. And I'm very happy with this process, and I think this process will last for decades on and on. And I think it will take it will need some curiosity, it will need some respect towards each other from both sides. And yeah, I think it will be a process.
I'm sorry, if you are interested in MBS or MBCT, you can have conversation with professor after this one, because we behind the schedule. I'm very sorry for that. And as appreciation, our appreciation, may I call upon Chief Justice from Bhutan, His Excellency Sherlin Wangchuk, to present the offerings, the souvenirs to Professor Garber, please. The staff, please. Please, staff, thank you. There's a little bit slightly change of the schedule of the program. Now we will continue with the next speaker, our director from International Buddhist Studies College from Mahachulalongkorn Rajavitraya University. His topic will be mindfulness and concentration-based learning. Venerable Associate Professor Dr. Hansa Tamahaso. He is currently our Director and Secretary to the Director of Mahajula, the Director of Peace Studies Program, and he has been appointed to be the Vice Chairman of the Steering Committee, the Office of the Basic Education Commission of Thailand. So with very warm welcome to Venerable Professor Dr. Hansa Tamahaso, please. Okay, while we waiting, Venerable Hansa received certificate conflict management course on public policy by means of Peace King Raja Dipok's Institute, and bachelor's degree in Buddhist studies, majoring in religious philosophy from MCU, also master degree in Buddhist studies from Thammasat University, and he also received his PhD in Buddhist studies, majoring in Buddhism from MCU as well. He is very well known in holism in peace studies, and he's working on the project of mindfulness and concentration-based learning in Thailand.